Much appreciation for the minority and majority sides of the Commerce and Health Committee for doing so much work on this, and really in Senator Burr, Senator Wicker, Senator Loomis, all added a lot to getting us to this point. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 65, Senate Bill 1658. Further, that the committee-reported substitute be withdrawn and the Merkley-Murkowski substitute amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to. The bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed. Then the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Kentucky.
Reserving the right to object. This bill is a perfect example of the government taking a one-size-fits-all approach on every workplace in America. It's the approach of those who think that the only way to get people to do the right thing is to pass a law and mandate it. Let's just look at one industry, the motor coaches. Unlike other commercial modes of transportation, motor coaches function with only one employer on board, the driver, who's responsible for picking up the passengers on time, getting them to their destinations safely. Almost by definition, bus routes depend on schedules and sticking to those schedules for customers in a safe and consistent way. Now, if you think the hammer of government is the only way to get people to do the right thing, you'd probably assume that the motor coach operators just exploit their nursing employees and don't give them any accommodations. But you'd be wrong. Under the law as it exists today, employers routinely offer alternative temporary duties to their drivers who are nursing. And this is what happens with the motor coaches. They are accommodating and doing the right thing, as most people in the workplace are. This bill would prohibit solutions like that. It would actually make it more difficult for motor coach to accommodate their workers by allowing them to have alternative duties, even when they are mutually agreed upon between employer and employee. There's already a national driver shortage, so operators have a built-in incentive to keep the drivers that they have making mutually beneficial arrangements. There's also already a federal law in the books that requires most employers to offer reasonable break time and a private non-bathroom area for their non-exempt nursing employees to use for a full year after the birth of a child. In addition, some 32 states, including my state of Kentucky, have passed their own laws on this issue, and some have even extended how long nursing mothers are covered by the law. Since all of these accommodations already exist at the federal and the state level, before we impose any new mandates on the whole country, we ought to study whether there is actually a need for more legislation in this area. I have an amendment to strike these new mandates and instead ask the Government Accountability Office to study this issue and report back within a year. I would ask my colleagues to agree to this amendment so we can determine if more laws are needed before we rush to put new burdens on American businesses. So, Mr. President, I would ask that the senator modify his request so that the Paul amendment, which would require a study to explore the severity of the problem at the desk, be considered and agreed to.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Senator from Oregon.
Thank you very much. Reserving the right to object. Our bill does address the motor coach situation. Clarifies, because of the conversations we've had with that industry, that in fact no additional expense be required, no additional driver, and we know that already under the accommodations of the Disabilities Act, there are rights that exist to drivers as well. But we here have a very limited provision because we make it clear that it does not require the employer to incur any significant expense, such as the removal, retrofitting of seats, or any driving under unsafe conditions or unscheduled stops. So that is from a long conversation that I would have been happy to fill my colleague in about if he had explored this issue. This is now 8 years that this topic has been before us. It has not just been studied in some academic sense, it's been studied in real life. And we still have thousands and thousands of women who have great difficulty getting permission to pump breast milk when they return to work. Those who have been accommodated say it has made a big difference in their life, about their bonding with their child, about their health as well as the child's, which is a point that Senator Coburn made. We have this in place for 50 or 49 million American women. Why have we left 9 million out? And by the way, in my state, we have a hardship waiver that says any company that finds that this is too difficult to implement can seek an accommodation. And you know what? Nobody applied because they could all figure it out. It's time to embrace the fact that we need to do right by our children. And so Senator Paul's amendment, which guts this bill and says let's study it, is not an answer for the millions of women seeking to do the best by their children. And so therefore, I object.
The objection is heard. Is there any objection to the original request?
I object.
The objection is heard.
President.
Senator from Oregon.
So my colleague doesn't share the view that many of us have reached on both sides of the aisle. And that is actually what the legislative process embraces, that people come to this floor and share their different views, and then we hold a vote. And he has really been a champion for holding votes on amendments, probably has had more amendments before this body than any other senator. And so therefore, I would say to my colleague that I'll provide an additional unanimous consent request that will enable us to have a vote on this bill. And he can weigh in as he like, and his side may carry the day. But I think it's important that a question of such magnitude, so many million new moms across this country, be considered and not simply be tossed in the waste bin. So I will ask consent for a vote on the Pump Act. I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 65, Senate Bill 1658. Further, that the committee-reported substitute be withdrawn and the Merkley-Murkowski substitute amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to. The bill, as amended, be considered, read a third time, and the Senate vote on passage of the bill.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Kentucky.
I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I will simply conclude by noting that we are all better off when issues can be debated and voted on this floor. There's tremendous frustration in the chamber right now. We have a very thick bill awaiting action. Why is it so thick? Because so few bills can get debated and voted on this floor. I would ask that my colleague from Kentucky, who I've worked with on many issues, think about this a little bit and maybe come back and say, yes, you're right, we should have a debate and a vote. This should not be something that any one individual suppresses. Thank you.